All right. All right. Agenda item F, Mr. Chair, as you pointed out, is the request we had from Reading related to the entrance fee. I believe you all have received a packet of information from MWRA information that we thought would be most helpful for this conversation after our first initial meeting and discussion on this. So just to recap the initial request and to follow up on the request that the executive committee members had for MWRA to provide information to address this topic more fully. Reading had expressed concern that the entrance fee waiver was unfair for those communities that previously paid entrance fees and requested looking into the possibility of either receiving reimbursement for its previous entrance fee payment or the possibility of receiving a repayment of the difference between the entrance fee they paid compared to the entrance fee that we associated with their actual level of consumption, which is a bit lower. As you pointed out, Mr. Chair, rightfully so, that this couldn't be a single out exception for one community. So we need to have an in-depth look at an analysis of what the impacts of the MWRA, communities, and its ratepayers would be, not just for Reading's request, but if the reimbursement for all of the communities that have paid entrance fees prior. Basically, if any reimbursement was authorized for Reading, it would need to be prepared as authorized for communities as well. So the information packet provided to you all from MWRA has responded to this question, and today we have with us Colleen Rizzi, Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs for MWRA, who's the system expansion kind of guru for us for MWRA with her, and then Matt Horan, the MWRA's Deputy Finance Director and Treasurer. And they'll help us answer questions that come up as we discuss this matter some more. So I think the first thing to point out from this response to the questions that we raised, that you all raised, is that, frankly, the financial impacts to the existing communities and their ratepayers would be pretty significant if all communities were reimbursed for their entrance fees. I'll kick it over to Mr. Horan to answer any questions in a moment, but essentially, the reimbursements to reimburse communities for the entrance fees already paid and to waive those expected to still come. Those are also already built into the projections for the other communities assessment, so those would have some pretty significant impacts. And the second thing I'd point out from this response is that there is a pretty clear pattern and practice from the other communities that have joined the system similar to Reading, which again, I know that Ms. Reed can help us clarify as well. So if all right, Mr. Chair, I'd like to begin by kind of posing some specific questions to Mr. Horn and Ms. Rizzi, kind of help hone in on pieces that are probably most germane for today. Matt, to address the first issue, could you please give us a
I'm sorry, Matt. It's Matt. Sorry, it's Colleen. It's still a bit choppy. I'm having a really hard time understanding.
We're going to try swapping out computers.
Yeah.
And that's the MWRA laptop.
Right? Exactly. That's what I think. I don't think the MWRA laptop this can actually do this. We didn't want to try the Apple, but
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Aaron, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
I don't know if that's better. But...
Okay. Matt, to address the first issue that we had flagged, could you, maybe give us a brief summary on what the rate impacts of reimbursing the communities who previously paid MWRA entrance fees and what the impacts of waiving those future anticipated payments for those communities that have spread out their payments over the future?
Sure. So based on the water rate and the total water assessment, paying back, so far through FY25, we've collected 25.9 million in entrance fees, and paying those fees back would add about 8.3% to the FY26 rate increase. So right now, the projected rate is at a 3.9. So you'd be looking at a rate close to about 12%, or actually a little over 12%, if we were to reimburse them all within 1 year. If you looked at reimbursing it even over time, it would probably add about 1% of the rate, even if you reimburse them over a shorter period. Right now, there's about 5.2 million left to be collected on entrance fees, and that's about it's about 0.1 on the rate, based on the amount that we're collecting each year that would be impacted. So that we're counting on that future revenue. So if that were to go away, it would add about 0.1 to the rate increase that you'd be looking at.
All right. So the next question is both for Colleen and for Matt. And one of the issues raised by Reading was that they had paid an entrance fee for a higher volume of water than they actually use. Can you maybe help us understand this by answering a few questions on this topic, starting with who sets the request for the amount being requested of the MWRA, the quantity of water?
Sure, I can take that one. That request comes from the communities. They tell us what they need to meet their current and future demands. And then we in turn tell them if our system can handle that from a max day perspective, and but the overall volume is set by the community.
And who, just to, for everyone, to remind everyone, who needs to review and approve the request before it even gets to the MWRA for your approval? You know, would the state approve any requested amount, or would it recommend either increasing or lowering the requested amount that a community brings to them as part of the regulatory process?
Sure. So for a new system joining the MWRA, they do have to go through the MWRA process and interbasin transfer Act approval through the Water Resources Commission. And for those that may not be familiar with the Interbasin Transfer Act, that is a policy that looks at, coming from a water resource in one river basin going into another. So in MWRA case, we have our Western Mass, Chicopee, Nashua River going to east, right? So if you were going to Reading, or so the Water Resources Commission is very interested in looking at the impacts from both the donor basin, meaning the Quabbin area, out to the receiving basin, and that's to make sure hydrologically water is being recharged in its local spot, etc. So that is a state approval for the Water Resources Commission, where they look at the volumes requested, look at conservation measures to make sure that the water is being used efficiently. So it's a pretty rigorous process that goes to both the Water Resources Commission and the MWRA office.
And they sometimes push back, right, on requests of communities, depending on what the situation of the issues are for their particular situation.
They do. Like I mentioned, they'll look at conservation measures. So one thing they look at in particular is unaccounted for water, to make sure that's not too high. So basically you're not taking water and losing it, to water loss. And they want to make sure that the projections and that request are reasonable, and that you're doing everything you can to use that water to the best that you can. So they'll ask questions about how the demands were calculated, what that means for future, and then again, looking at, any potential impacts from local or the donor basin. One thing that the Interbasin Transfer Act really tries to do is keep all sources local, which is why they have such an interest in the amount of water that's flowing between basins, because again, they would like to be recharging and using in the same river basin.
Once the state's regulatory approvals are completed, what are the next steps for the community or the entity to request MWRA water?
So the entity would submit an application to MWRA. We say an application, it's really a cover letter with the required components of our operating policy number 10, which is what governs the admission of a new system or a new community to our water system. And that lays out a number of requirements, one of them being the state approvals, the local board approval, right, whether it's town meeting or whatever your local governance is. There's a checklist of items that need to be complete, and one of those is our Enabling Act legislation to be added to the MWRA Enabling Act. So once all of those pieces are in place, the community then submits to MWRA. We review the application, but in reality, most of the coordination with MWRA has been happening kind of all along, right? We talk about the points of connection, what our system can handle. So it's not as though, a community is doing something in a vacuum and then they come in at the end. We are in pretty close coordination with them, but the formal approval, once the application comes in, is Underbury staff reviews, make sure all the pieces are there. We then go to Underbury Advisory Board for approval. If the advisory board approves, we then go to the MWRA Board of Directors for that final approval for admission.
So what opportunities, if any, exist for the community to select or request of MWRA a different amount of water approved by the state regulatory process? I can think of a few examples in the past where I think they've come in and asked and gotten approved at the state level for a certain amount, but then have come and asked you for not as much as that. Is that an accurate?
Yeah,
recollection?
we have. Yep, there's a couple of examples of that. So when going through the Interbasin Transfer Act approval, it's a long process, right? Anytime you're going through MWRA and the Water Resources Commission, it just takes time. So we have seen some communities ask for kind of what their maximum would be in the long term, right? They're looking on a 20, 30, 40-year horizon, if not more. That is the approval they're asking, or the volume that they're asking for approval from the Water Resources Commission. But then on the kind of short-term needs, we write a contract with new communities. The first one is 5 years, and then they go into 10-year renewal periods. Each time that we're writing that initial contract and then the renewals, we are revisiting the demands that they're requesting. So, Wilmington's a good example. They have their Interbasin Transfer Act approval for about 620 million gallons per year. When they came to us in 2009, they were only coming in at 219. And then they upped that last year to about 450. So they still have a little bit of a reserve from what they've asked for from both the Water Resources Commission versus what they're asking for us. And part of that is we don't necessarily want to artificially reserve volumes of water that could ultimately go to another community, right? So we try to be very mindful as we are working with the communities of what their short-term needs are, and then as we go through the process, again, what their long-term needs are. So we often have communities ask for, a smaller amount on the short term, say that 5, 10, the 2 renewals out, and then could go up higher.
So what are some of the examples of communities that joined and or increased their withdrawal approvals from MWRA?
So I mentioned I mentioned the Wilmington one. And actually when Reading first came in, they came in as a partial at 219 million gallons per year. And then when they came in 2007 at the 766.5 million gallons per year, and kind of put into the contract, reserving the right to come back later for additional, but the Interbasin Transfer Act approval is actually for 829. So there's still volume there that has been approved at the state level that is not currently, contracted with MWRA. Dedham Westwood has done the same thing. They came in, they're still partial, but they've come in and over time increased their request, right, or their demands from us as needs change. Of course, it's not an exact science as you're coming for a certain approval. So they do, that's why we do those 10-year renewals as well, is as another chance to look at what the prior 5 years of usage has been and what the projection going forward is, so that we can, as we do the renewals, can also adjust if needed on the volumes.
And has there ever been a previous request from a community that paid an entrance fee to be reimbursed for the amount of flow that they did not ultimately take? And if so, what was the determination and the reasoning of how MWRA responded to that request?
I know of one instance where the town of Stoughton requested a partial refund of their entrance fee going on probably about 10 years ago. I want to say it was the 2017 timeframe. That was subsequently denied, much for the similar reasons that we're talking about now, the increase or the impacts on rates. And when people are paying the entrance fee, they're essentially buying into infrastructure that is already in place, right? So infrastructure that has been paid for by existing member communities over time. So that's really the kind of the background of why we pay the entrance fee. So when they came in, it was more, you know, the request was ultimately denied for that same reason. They had I think they had originally come in for, I don't remember the amount offhand, but ultimately started using more of their local sources, which was what resulted in the request for the refund of the entrance fee, or a partial refund.
So I guess at this point then, it's really for the executive committee, because you asked for follow-up information. MWRA has given you, some there. I tried to, point out some of the biggest issues. Before I move on, Colleen or Matt, is there anything else from, you know, kind of this packet of information that you think that, members should be aware of that we didn't hit on before we open it up for their discussion?
The other thing I'll add is, I think we've talked about it kind of, you know, inadvertently, but the entrance fee that's paid is again based on the flow requested. I know there have been some concerns about the dollar amount that Reading paid relative to some other communities. But what I think is important to note is the flow of the 766 is significantly larger than some of the other communities that had paid the entrance fee, right? So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it is very much a flow-based calculation for that entrance fee.
So basically, what we're looking at is we're looking at a community using a really large amount of flow, comparing with some previous entrants that are using lesser amount of flow. And those relationship between the amount of entrance fee that was paid, you know, is basically it's in proportion. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's right. So I had looked at the communities that have paid entrance fees, their corresponding flows, and did, you know, a tabulation of both. And when you look at the percentage of the flow and the percentage of entrance fee paid, they're very on target. It's between 33 and 35% respectively for the flow and the entrance fee. So it's really on target and proportional.
So I guess it would be a good chance for committee members to ask any additional questions at the point.
Just a quick question. Has any new community been admitted to the MWRA and taken or was granted the waiver? And I don't know when we passed it in 2021 or 2022. Any new communities granted the waiver so far? And is there a list of communities lined up to take the waiver?
Yes, so I'll answer that in two parts. So the waiver went into effect in September 2022. We haven't had new communities officially join just yet, although Linfield Center Water District is really close. They had requested the waiver, but we have had some existing member communities that increased their flow and got the waiver for that delta. Burlington and Dedham Westwood both had amendments to their contracts in 2023 where they increased their flow, and the entrance fee for that increase was waived. But no new communities have officially come in, although again, Linfield Center Water District is imminent in the next few months. And then Wilmington actually increased their flow last year as well. During their contract renewal, the entrance fee was waived for that delta, or that increase as well. In terms of number of communities kind of waiting in the wings, Linfield Center Water District, Wayland is going through the process. They're going into the MWRA process soon, as is the town of Natick. So those are kind of the ones that are likely the next ones coming down the pike.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Lou. Any other questions from executive board or executive committee members?
Let me just clarify. Since we stopped the entrance fee requirement, no one's been admitted to the system.
No brand new ones yet.
But there's some,
Yeah.
Winfield's very close.
Right, the one that we just
Okay.
approved, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll just.
Yeah.
approve.
We
I
approved
missed
it, but it was
the meeting.
contingent on their legislation that has to get passed, as well as MWRA's final vote to admit them as well.
Okay,
And we've got a couple in the MWRA process. Colleen, how far along are they? Like when, if you had to guess how quickly they go through and, you know, I am familiar with the Interbasin Transfer Act, having worked on a few communities' applications in the past.
Usually familiar.
painfully familiar professionally. You know, if you had to guess, when do you think those applications would be hitting the committee?
Yeah, I mean, once they've actually gotten into the MIPA process, and again, I think Wayland's aiming to get in the next couple of months. Natick is probably not far behind. I mean, we say it's about a year and a half or so. It really depends on how quickly the MIPA submissions are put together and then revised as needed, right, for the subsequent filings. It kind of goes, depends on how quickly they go. But we usually say about a year and a half to two. And then actually there's one other, it's a small one that hasn't gotten quite so far yet, but the Sherborne Water and Sewer District is also going to be applying to come in. They are in the MIPA process currently. They're a small amount of flow right on the Sherborne Framingham line. So they'll likely get through the MIPA process before Wayland and Natick. So they're probably maybe same thing, a year out, if I had to guess.
Does anyone have, I can't see all the hands on the screen if there are any digital hands up.
Actually,
like
one thing I
that.
will add to the timeline discussion too is, you know, with the waiver expiring on December 31st of 2027, I will say that's also, as we talk about timeline and how quickly they're going to go through, I think that is going to, it's a good, I'll say motivator or incentive, right, for these communities to go as quickly as possible through this process, because they are trying to get in under the December 31st, 2027 timeframe.
Thank you for that, because I was going to ask that you refresh my memory as to when that expires, which I should have memorized, but you know.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, it looks like we do have a digital hand up from someone who's a visitor today. It looks like Chris Haley.
Let's take that question or comment.
Hey everyone, thank you. Chris Haley, I'm chair of the Reading Select Board, and like I had mentioned at the previous meeting, I thank you for taking this matter seriously and obviously putting a lot of thought and discussion and really putting together with Colleen mentioning all the data that she just did now. I understand that an $11 million buyback is obviously fairly significant, and you mentioned going over the rates and how we can do this, and perhaps, you know, we could split that over 10 years if the board was amicable to that. But as I mentioned at the previous meeting, that at minimum, we should be seeking to get back that initial buy-in. We were, you know, it was expect to be 766 milligallons. I think it's milligallons. And we only used 608. So the difference in that was roughly about 2.2 million. I think that in the grand scheme of things, in the overall agenda topic, I think that is the most fairest way to settle this, and then it's easy to scale that out for other communities, if that's the way that the board decides. But nobody is going to be as high as us, because Reading bought in at the 44% overall rate for all the MWRA communities. We're at 44%. So I heard the Stoughton example. I don't know what their buy-in is, but I know it's not 44%. I'd guess it's in the low single digits if I had to even put that. And just one other last point is I know that other communities joining in now get the waiver, but I vaguely recall from my, you know, kind of initial background on this, that there's a significant amount of communities that didn't even have to buy in starting it 10 years ago, because there was a discussion where, you know, we didn't do this 10 years back, but I might be misremembering my data on that, but I don't think anyone has paid in 10 years, even though you're offering waivers now. I could be completely incorrect, but I think there's no money changing hands in that regard. But like I said, biggest thing, we paid 44%. We have like one of the highest water rates in the entire state because of this. And we just set the water rates last night, and, you know, compared to Stoneham or anybody else, I mean, we're like on another planet because of it. So it's really doing our community a disservice. I mean, obviously, you try not to pay attention to social media, but it's always just hammering us on why our water rates are so high, and and it essentially it's because of this buy-in. So at minimum, I'm just saying, please just consider the 2.2 million, whatever that figure is, on the difference of our overpayment back in the day. And I really appreciate all your time and thank you for this.
I don't know.
Just some point of clarification, Colleen and Matt,
Yeah.
as far as I recall, the entrance fee had been in effect up until we provided the waiver a couple of years ago. And as a matter of fact, as I was working on those interface and transfer for clients, showing my age here, 25, 30 years ago, the entrance fee was part of the calculation. So just so everyone's clear, is that correct?
That's right. So the first town to actually pay the entrance fee was Bedford, and that was in 1993. And that was
And
under our operating policy number 10, went into effect
Sorry, Carly.
at that
And then the
point.
most-
And the last, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, we're talking
That's-
past each other. You go. I'll wait until you're done, and then I just have one more clarification.
Okay, and then the last town to join was Burlington and Ashland in 2020, and both of whom paid entrance fees. So everybody from 1993 to 2020 has paid an entrance fee. And as I mentioned, Burlington, when they increased, that was waived, but they did pay the initial entrance fee when they joined in 2020.
Looks like Mr. Haley has his hand up again.
Sorry about that. So Colleen, do you know, I know that they paid, but what is the amount that Burlington paid as their entrance fee? Because Reading's was 11 million or whatever. So what, obviously Burlington is larger than us. What was their entrance fee though?
So and again, this is where the point I made earlier about the flow-based is a really important piece of this, right? Because Burlington, their entrance fee was for 324 million gallons at $4.4 million. The Reading one was 11 million, but it was for 766, right? So you're more than double what Burlington's flow was. So
Correct.
that's where that flow thing is just a really key piece that I want to just kind of keep coming back to. If it's repetitive, I apologize, but because that's even the percentages, right? The 44% that you mentioned earlier, which it's a little bit lower only because Bedford wasn't on your list originally. So it's actually, when you look at the total of the entrance fees paid, Reading's about 35%, but 33% of the flow.
So Burlington did not receive a waiver on any sort of funds at all. It is, they paid the 4
They paid 4.4 when they came in 2020. When they increased in 2023, that was waived,
Okay. And how
but
much,
not their original.
what's the difference between when they got in and when, how you just mentioned the increase? What's the difference there? A couple million, 100,000? Do you know what it is?
We have that. Okay, ready. Just give me 1 second on that.
And then that's just my last question. So thank you.
Just give me 1 second to pull that up if someone else wants to. I see there's another
Yeah, and while
couple of hands up.
Colleen is looking that up. Yeah, Burlington is kind of that example of they got in, they would always plan to do a two-phase approach to joining the MWRA. And it just so happened that their first phase happened before the entrance fee waiver, and then their second phase they were ready to come on for was after the entrance fee waiver was in effect. So they did end up paying for part of it and not for the second phase. Just the way the time that worked out. While we're letting Colleen look things up and just give all when you're ready, Colleen, I do see another hand up there. Can see Mr. Cole, our designee voting member from Reading is here today and has a hand up. I'm assuming it's the whole team there in the room with you,
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes, and I'm just going to defer to town manager Matt Cornell, so I'd like to make a couple of comments.
Thank you, if that's okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so my name is Matt Cornelis. I was at the last meeting. I'm the town manager in Reading. In the room with me is the assistant town manager, Jane Wellman, our CFO, Sharon Amstrom, and everybody knows Chris Cole. I think I have the entire select board on the Zoom today. And also Representative Bradley Jones and his staff member, Michael Smith, is on the call today as well. And I believe Paul Silva may be in the room with you today. So we take this matter still very seriously. Like I said last time, I think it's a matter of fundamental fairness. Reading has paid way more than every other town. And I think I won't reiterate the arguments I made last time. And I stand behind what Chris said 100% regarding the 2.2 million. But if you were to reimburse the entire Reading amount, 11 million, or if it has to be 25 million for every town, I think that's less than a 1% increase over the next 10 years, if you do it, amortize it over 10 years. And the impact of that could be made up from the offset of the new towns coming in. So I know it sounds like a large number, but it could be done, and I think in a way that doesn't negatively affect other communities or the MWA or MWRA itself. So I would hope that you would still consider that option as well. If not, the $2.2 million option is obviously something we're looking into, and we would be fortunate to have, and do appreciate your time taking this up at several meetings. But I just wanted to let you know how serious we take it in terms of everybody being here today. We stand by Paul Silva's letter that was sent originally back in February. And I think there's a solution here that wouldn't cost as much as initially we thought, for you and for us, and we hope that you would really give some consideration to that as well. Thank you.
I also see Elena's hand is up as well.
Hi, sorry about that. Trying to get my video on. I just had a couple questions. So first question is, if we're looking at the water use element, if Reading hasn't been using the water that they got permitted for, I'm curious, has anyone who's paid the entrance fee been using over the water volume that they projected?
I would have to look through and see what their, for each of the dozen or so communities that have paid, what their contract value is versus what they're using. Nothing is coming to mind. We do have periodically some spikes. When a community, I think Peabody had their water treatment plant fire a couple of years ago. They used more for us as a supplementary while they were rebuilding. We sometimes see some spikes during drought years. But on the average over the contract periods, no one is popping into my mind that is, exceeding on a consistent basis or anything. Usually it's an emergency situation that we have some spikes.
Thank you.
But
Yeah,
I can certainly do some research and get an actual answer for that. That's just off the top of my head from,
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because as far as I see it, the original intent of the entrance fee was that all the communities who were part of the original MWRA service area, I believe, paid to build all the infrastructure that exists now. So I think, waiving an entrance fee completely from decades ago or years ago, I understand the fairness concern from Reading in terms of maybe the amount that they've paid compared to what others paid as entrance fees, but I think that kind of, we might be missing the point. The original point of the entrance fee was to make it fair with all the communities who paid for the original infrastructure. So, and I assume the calculations back when the entrance fees were first created had some tie back to what we all paid to build the system. So that's my first thought, is that I don't really see that's not any different now. We all did pay originally, and the communities who entered later paid later, and that was supposed to make up for the fact that they didn't pay early on. So to me, the only kind of wiggle room here would maybe be with the flow. And I could see that if communities paid a different amount than the flow that they're using, you know, if it's a vast difference, then maybe there's some wiggle room there, but I think it would have to be applied equally to everybody who paid an entrance fee. And that's why I was asking if anyone paid for less than they're using, because I would think it would apply in both directions, right? If you paid an entrance fee and now you're using more water, those communities would potentially have to pay more. And I don't think there's anybody who's going to accept an after the fact bill for more. But if that doesn't apply, then, you know, maybe there's something to look at in terms of a readjustment across the board for the folks who've paid an entrance fee to make it consistent with the amount they're using. But personally, I don't see waiving a whole entrance fee, because I do think it was intended to contribute to what we all contributed to earlier on.
Yeah, I'll sort of echo that sentiment. The temporary waiver on the entrance fee was on the basis of a different business case. And I think during the time that the entrance fee was in effect, the business case for the entrance fee had some solid logic. The executive committee and then the board deliberated on the waiving of the entrance fee for substantial time. And it was on a basis of the business case, frankly. That, you know, by the time that we were then applying the waiver, most every community, original member community, had paid off, you know, their debt that resulted in the existing infrastructure, and we had a commodity to sell that we could lower our annual rates by successfully selling that commodity. So I personally don't see a case here for waiving the entire amount for Reading, which I do think would, you know, result in, you know, Denton, Westwood, Bedford, or Burlington, you know, entering. So, you know, then there's the second question of whether we want to entertain the idea of, you know, that's, you know, second stage, you know, the argument that Reading came in at a higher rate than what they're actually using. As Colleen pointed out, there's a lot of regulatory review that went into that. So I do think we may be triggering a secondary, like a MWRA review and Interbasin Transfer Act review in the opposite way. I'm not entirely sure of that, just sort of thinking on here, but before we move any further, we've taken the temperature of 2 executive committee members. I'm wondering if there are any others that want to sort of opine, and I do see a hand from Mr. Manugian.
Thank you. A similar perspective. I feel that Reading, similar to Bedford, when they originally signed up, they purchased the right or the opportunity to use up to a certain amount of water. And in the end, they did not exercise that full right, but they still had that right to use. And so to me, it's a very high threshold to go back 15 years later to make adjustments to folks. So thank you.
Yeah, I share the same general view, I guess. I think to unwind the whole thing, I think has a ripple effect that has a lot of bad consequences to it. I guess I'm more open to some sort of a partial adjustment here. If one could do that in a way that would not ripple into other communities in a way that could work financially here, I'd be interested in understanding that, but I don't see that at this point. So maybe that's a question for the MWRA staff to say, is there a path to do that without dysfunction substantially for other communities?
Oh, I just see 2 and.
Yep, we see Mr. Rademacher has his hand up.
Yes, just to answer the chair's question about the sentiment of the other members, I would echo what you're hearing from other committee members right now, executive committee members, is that the entrance fee was there after a lot of thought and a lot of good reason. If there was going to be an evaluation of the usage, I would be in support of that, understanding that it's still a high hurdle to walk that back.
I see Mr. Handel's hand is up as well.
I agree with the sentiment I'm hearing from the rest of the executive committee. To go back and untangle sets a precedent that gets to be very messy over time, I think.
I don't see any other, oh, Mr. Hersey, your hand is up as well?
Yeah, I agree with the other executive committee members too. I mean, to put it in perspective, if we were to, tack on an additional percent to the member communities to try and subsidize this move, it's significant. I mean, Brookline's paying over 20-something million dollars to the MWRA annually, and to increase that to just a single community is a lot to bear. So I just wanted to concur with my fellow board members and also add that in. Thank you.
That is the last of the committee members I see with hands up, Mr. Chair. I do see some other hands up if you are willing to take some. Melissa Murphy had her hand up for a while, and Representative Jones looks like he has his hand up as well.
Yeah, let's recognize Representative Jones, please.
Thank you. I think there's always been a lot of discussion, and obviously I get a clear sense of where the board's sentiment lies. But I did sense that there may be some willingness to have a discussion about the delta versus uses versus the fee. And would certainly think that's a path that should be explored further, and request that perhaps some modeling be done in ways that, may have minimal impact on rates for other communities. I certainly understand that this gets to be, everybody would be fine doing something if it didn't cost anybody else any money. But that's not the world that we live in. I understand that. Working in the legislature, that's sort of a hallmark. So I would certainly think that there's an equity argument that can be made that it seems like Reading is paying a disproportionate amount relative to other decisions, and I understand the MWRA wants to secure additional ratepayers. I would also recognize that when Reading was done, added in the mid-2000s, and it was done very expeditiously, I was there. There was also the side benefit of a significant amount of protection for the Ipswich River Basin, which is extremely stressed. The town of North Reading has now since purchased all its water from the Merrimack River Basin, all of which has benefited the Ipswich River Basin. But it seems to me that Reading's paying a disproportionately high cost for the entirety of the system, has extraordinarily high rates. But I understand the situation the MWRA faces as an entirety, but would request that you look at the $2.2 million figure. And again, it's not something I think the town is saying needs to be made up all at once by any stretch of the imagination, but could certainly be made up over time, and that would tend to reduce the rates that Reading ratepayers are paying, hopefully with minimal or no increase that the rates other ratepayers are paying for other communities. So I would request that of the board and maybe defer a final decision for today's meeting.
All communities get charged the same amount for water, don't they? We don't charge different amounts, different communities.
Right, there's a wholesale rate.
The wholesale
Okay.
rates.
Rate.
And that's the same for everyone.
Yes.
So everyone's paying,
I mean,
so still
minus,
running.
yeah, so the weather communities have their own. Rate base
So
rate.
we say different rate for Reading, it's really not the wholesale rate, it's that they paid an entrance fee 15 years ago.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what the issue being discussed today is specifically the entrance fee.
Well, I hear about the higher rates for Reading, I'm going, I thought we all paid the same.
Remember, there's also the difference between the MWRA's wholesale. rates
I
and our
understand
retail rate. Yeah,
that.
so that's, yeah, absolutely, there's always that extra layer of cost from the local level that gets.
And just for the record, while Reading's water rates are relatively higher, the combined rates, number 1 and number 2 are always Winthrop and Somerville.
So I do wanna make a small comment, is I took abuse for years from our town manager from the pipeline that was being put through Stoneham to supply water to Reading. I got beat on like nobody's business.
So the temperature I'm taking from the executive committee is that, you know, the full reimbursement is a non-starter. Some of us may be open to exploring the idea of partial. But I think we need a couple of things. One is a more specific request from Reading on that basis, exactly how much they're looking to reduce their buy-in. And perhaps you know, just some sort of proposal as to how they would want to see that structured. And then we would need further examination. And by the way, Colleen and Matt, what you provided us on this was excellent, and I really appreciate the MWRA staff time on this. You know, sort of an evaluation of what that looks like, including, you know, the potential from their communities that have paid into it. Like what is our sort of total liability there? You know, I do also, you know, from my own perspective, should then something happen in the future and Reading has to increase again, I would not be at all interested in applying the waiver for that. So you know, there's also that. So I do think that there's some, you know, additional specifics we could hear from Reading, some additional analysis from MWRA staff. And I think we can, you know, sort of keep this item open on that basis, unless there are any other thoughts or objections
I
from
just
this.
have one comment if I could. And on the issue of fairness, I know we talked about how towns come in above that target and below that target. It's interesting. I think the advisory board and I think the MWRA as a whole want to be fair. And go back to those water continuation agreements. There's a clause in there that if the town goes over their limit, they have to pay an additional entrance fee. So it's not like it's the guess, and if you're over, well, there's no entrance fee. The authority has the ability to charge that entrance fee should they go over.
Yeah.
This is just the other side. And it should have been in the initial agreements that if you're materially under by some amount, which we are, that there's an adjustment for that.
Yeah. And I think that should be part of the analysis, the specifics on that. But I also want to be clear, you know, both the representative and I sort of touched on it, is the overall regulatory approval. Because he's correct. The Ipswich River Basin is stressed. And in the Interbasin Transfer Act analysis, I'm sure that one of the compelling reasons for that approval was the benefit to the Ipswich, which would now theoretically be reversed, you know, even though in actuality, because the water use has been lower, that, you know, hasn't actually, you know, exhibited a real benefit on the Ipswich. In theory, if Reading's were to be reduced, the way that, you know, the legal process was approved would be impacted. So I do think we have to understand what the impacts are there.
I do see David Menugin's hand up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I don't agree with Reading's arguments. I do feel like it raises some interesting questions about fairness and entrance, and it might be worth the discussion at the whole advisory board level. You know, we're 40 years out from MWRA being formed. I think for a new generation to talk about these things, I think it's interesting. So whether we support it or not, I just wanted to throw out for consideration, bringing it to the board as a whole. Thank you.
I'd reinforce Rich's point that I think the ball is in Reading's court on this, and I don't think we want to negotiate with ourselves here. So
Not quite yet.
I would look to Reading to come back with a proposal, maybe an option or two to say, here's what we think could work. And then look to the MWRA staff to analyze the impact of that, present that to the executive committee and the advisory board for a decision.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I think that's generally the sense of the executive committee. I don't know that we need a formal vote on that. I think, you know, that's sort of direction in this, you know, keep the conversation going.
I think that that's maybe the question for Mr. Cole and the members in the room there with you. Was that a pretty clear indication of what the executive committee would ask to have back from your team, so we can then bring it to MWRA for further analysis? Or are there any follow-up clarifying questions we can help answer?
You're muted.
Yeah, no, we do appreciate that. I mean, we feel we've done a lot of that, you know, leading up to these last two meetings, but we will certainly put something together again. submit it for your consideration based on all the feedback we heard today, which was great feedback, and we appreciate how much time you allotted to us. I think when we submit the information, it won't be much different than what we've already submitted and said, but we can maybe hone that message a little bit based on your feedback today. So I do appreciate the time. Anybody else in the room have any comments from our side? Okay.
Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and again, thank you all for bringing this to our attention and your help in this analysis.
Appreciate it.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Silva.
so I guess the running joke that my nickname is out of order, it continues.